So a few years ago, I was in a conversation with a friend. He called me up, an old high school buddy, and he asked me to officiate his wedding to his high school sweetheart. He'd been dating her for more than 20 years, and I responded, "Are you sure she's the one? Do you need a little bit more time?" Which we were friends, so I could rib at him a little bit there. You may have noticed, or you may have heard, that marriage is on its deathbed these days. That's what they're telling us, isn't it? That happily ever after is no more. That it's an antiquated delusion. That marriage was a thing of that was just for property rights and it was just for this and that. But that it's kind of old-fashioned and old hat. That's kind of what we're hearing these days, right? And so the statistics would seem to validate that. When you look at the statistics, you see that from 1960, the divorce rate has doubled. You would look at the rate of cohabitation. 7 in 10 American couples are cohabitate before they get married, or many of them just skip marriage altogether. 4 in 10 Americans view marriage as obsolete altogether. 4 out of 10. And so that's what we're hearing all the time, those kind of statistics. You've heard those kind of things. But I would also suggest that there's a little bit more if we dig deeper beneath the surface. If we just sort of normalize a few of these, just kind of pick out a few constants to focus on within these statistics to keep them from becoming skewed, you start to get a little bit different of a picture. For instance, if you just take any couple and you give them just a basic education, just a basic income, and they make sure they wait until they're married before they have a baby, and they have just a little bit of religious devotion. Like if you take those 4 things, the divorce rate is actually still remarkably low. And in surveys of married couples, the world would tell us there's no way this is true. The world's pessimistic toward marriage, jaded toward love and marriage. But if you do, what the surveys are actually telling us is that 62% of married people are very happy in their marriage. Not only that, but they're more stable in their happiness. Not only that, but those who are not happy in their marriage, if they just stay together for 5 years and don't get a divorce, within 5 years, they will be happy once again in their marriage. That's a little bit of a different picture, isn't it? And so here's my question. My question is, why is there such a disparity between the reality and what so many people are saying, that marriage is dying, that marriage is dead, that marriage is obsolete, that married people are miserable, when in fact what we're seeing, if we dig just a little bit deeper, is that married people are both very happy and more stable in their happiness. Why is that? Well, these are some of the questions we're going to answer today from God's Word. But more than that, what I want to do today, and this isn't just about marriage, it's about love, it's about romance, it's about the whole picture. My hope is that by the end of today, you will begin to have a grander picture, God's vision of what romantic love really can be and is supposed to be as He designed it. Not the jaded picture of love that we have in the world, but God's vision of romantic love. And I want you to walk out actually inspired by that vision. And so we're in a new series called Head Over Heels. Head Over Heels. And in this series, we're going to be studying a book called the Song of Songs. It's a book of the Bible dedicated entirely to love, sex, and romance, and we're going to be talking about all 3 over the next several weeks. Let me just give you guys a little bit of a preview of what's coming down the pike in the next few weeks. So today, we're going to talk about the magic of love. Next week, we're going to talk about love's new light, the way love can open up brand new possibilities for us. The week after that is lovesick, and then last of all, love making. So we've got a lot to talk about, don't we? So make sure to mark your calendar. You're like, I'm marking my calendar for March 1st. No, we're just walking through the Song of Songs, and it's all in there. And I want to before we just jump into this series, I want to make just a few disclaimers, okay? Number one, I want to address single people in the room. I am not suggesting by the fact that we're even having this series that like singleness is like some kind of stigma or scar that makes you subpar or less than. Let's remember that the person we came here to worship this morning was a single guy, okay? So to say that singleness makes you less than or subpar is blasphemy, something I try to stay away from. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing, and there's different categories of single people. Some are single people who want to be in a relationship, and this series will speak a lot to you, as much to you as anybody. There are also single people who feel devoted in their singleness, like Jesus, like the Apostle Paul, where Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 that singleness enables us, it's a gift from God that enables us to have a single-hearted and single-minded devotion for Jesus. So singleness is a wonderful thing. It is a gift just as well. But my hope is that if you are in the category of, I want to be single so I can be single-hearted for the Lord, if that's what you're saying, I hope that this series can help you sift your motivations here. And what I mean by that is, I've met some people sometimes where it's like, they say it's for the Lord, but really they're just kind of jaded on love and have kind of given up on love. And so they're like, it's for the Lord. So I don't want that for you. If it's a true desire in your heart for a romantic relationship, the Lord gives us the desires of our hearts if we delight in Him. The Lord wants that for you if you want that for you. Okay? And so I just want to just say there's something for everybody here today. And to validate singleness is a real wonderful way of life too. So hopefully I covered all the bases there. Actually, I do have one more disclaimer before we get started, and it's really just sort of an introduction to this book, The Song of Songs. The Song of Songs, if you had studied like kind of just through church history, how this how this book of the Bible has been interpreted, by and large, it's been interpreted allegorically. It's been interpreted symbolically, and so the scenes of intimacy between the two lovers are viewed as intimacy with Christ. And then even when it gets like really graphic, and I mean not graphic, tasteful graphic, right? But where it mentions things like breasts, okay? The church theologians throughout history have interpreted those in various ways. Sometimes they're representative of the Old and New Covenant. When French kisses come up in Song of Songs chapter 4, well, this is the gospel on our lips. And so the church, in my opinion, what has happened is that rather than actually looking at the text honestly, the church historically has been so embarrassed about sex that we haven't looked at the text and assessed what it truly actually says. I mean, you got to give it to them. They're pretty creative in their ability to get symbolic with this, but there are some things like that it's just hard to find a symbol for. And so this is not an allegory. It does point to our relationship with Jesus in some ways, but it's not purely an allegory. This is a real love story between a king named Solomon and a Hebrew Cinderella named Shulamith. Okay, that's her name. And so we're going to open it up into Song of Songs, chapter 1. Song of Songs, chapter 1. And by the way, we should not be embarrassed about sex. Okay? God was the one who created sex. Sex belongs to God, not the devil, right? Okay? Sex is a gift from God, and like every gift from God, it's meant to be enjoyed. So we should not be obsessed with sex, for sure, but we also shouldn't be embarrassed about it. In fact, the first command of the Bible, be fruitful and multiply. There you go. So, Song of Songs, chapter 1, we're going to start with verses 1 through 4. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. This is her talking. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Your anointing oils are fragrant. Your name is oil poured out. Therefore, the virgins love you, which that was their way of just saying all the single ladies. Verse 4, draw me after you. She's kind of dreaming here. Let us run. The king has brought me into his chambers. So we'll stop there. That starts pretty fast, doesn't it? As soon as, like the very first thing she says is, I want to make out with Solomon. by verse 4, she's saying, I want to consummate a marriage with Solomon. Like, really? Take me to your bedchamber? Like, this is pretty fast, isn't it? What do you think's being communicated? Now, those of you who've fallen in love before in the room, wouldn't you say that's kind of an accurate description of how it happens? It goes fast. It's like when you're sitting in that roller coaster and it's like about to start and you're like, when is this thing going to start? You know what I'm talking about? Anyone in here ever been Twitter-pated before? That's Bambi's word for falling in love. You know the word, right? Okay. Twice in this song already, the song, it uses wine to talk about what it's like to fall in love. Wine is intoxicating. Now, this is figurative, but, scientists are actually discovering it's not just figurative. There's a literal reality that the neurotransmitter released in your brain when you drink a glass of wine happens to be the same thing released in your brain when you fall in love. And a lot of the same kind of chemicals are released in your brain in the same way drugs and alcohol. It's like it is a rush, and that's what it's trying to communicate off the bat. Solomon's point, and the way he writes this song and organizes it from the very beginning, is that love is magical. It's magical. And Solomon wouldn't understand our symbolism and our sort of metaphor that we use today where we talk about she was struck by Cupid's arrow. He'd be like, what are you talking about? Well, that's kind of how we feel about his metaphors. We're like, what are you talking about? But we're all really just communicating the same thing with a different cultural language. Love is magical. It's as intoxicating as wine. It's as sudden as falling off of a cliff, and just as much of a rush. That's what it's trying to picture in this scene. And what this should do for us, for those of us who are in the room and are single, it should give us hope. It could happen to you. I remember when I was in college, 21 years old, and I went to the University of Texas. And, I knew I wanted, to marry a godly woman, and you tend to find those in churches, not on 6th Street in Austin, Texas, where every student goes. The University of Texas is not exactly known as being the bastion of all righteousness. There were 50,000 students. Not all of them loved Jesus. A few did, okay? And those few, I think, went to my church. And I kind of scanned the prospects. And there were some attractive young ladies. But I remember thinking, by the age of 21, I'd been in the church for a few years, and I came into college thinking, I honestly wasn't one of those guys who thought, I'm not going to get married till I'm 49 and well-established and my 401k is fully funded. I wanted to get married right out of college. I was cool with that. I was on board. But then 21 years old, and I'm not really meeting anybody, that there's some good, attractive young females, prospects in my church, but the magic wasn't there with any of them. And so I just kind of wrote it off and said, well, I don't know where else I'm going to meet a girl, maybe somewhere down the road. And I just kind of went along my way. Well, going into my junior year of college, 21 years old, I signed up for a study abroad trip through the University of Texas at the University of Edinburgh. That's how they say it in Scotland. The University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And I signed up for it, and lo and behold, that lady right there signed up for it, Alicia. The magic didn't start right away, though. We just kind of got to know each other there over that semester of study abroad. The magic didn't happen until an event occurred, and that event was related to an organization she was part of called the Texas Spirits. And that's an organization, it wasn't like Holy Spirit, it was like, we got spirit, yes we do. And they'd paint up all the windows before football games and that kind of deal. And she was one of the officers in the organization. And she said to herself, she was an officer, and her friend Molly was the president. And they had a formal event coming up. All the students would bring out their prom dresses, and the guys would rent tuxedos, and they'd, and it was a female organization, so they'd all invite guys to go along with them, and everybody would dress up, and it would be like this big formal ball. But Alicia said, I kind of want to do something crazy. Let's just do something crazy. And so her friend Molly, okay, yeah, what do you want to do crazy? She's like, what if we dressed up in Southern Belle attire. Like the big poofy dresses and the, I guess what you call it, parasol, the white gloves and all this. And let's do it. And our friend Molly's like, yeah, but then they're like, but who's a crazy guy who would go with us? I am proud to say that I was the first person that came to mind under the list of crazy guys. So she calls me up, asks if I want to go. Yes. And if I have any crazy friends. I'm like, I have a lot of crazy friends. So I want to show you a picture of the date that it all happened. There it is. Yes, I forgot to mention, I had a monocle and fake mustache. And so you have to remember that this was like nobody else was dressed like that. So that was me and Alicia and my friend Clay and her friend Molly. And so we went on this double date. And I knew that whoever I felt the magic with was going to be someone who could both put up with my crazy, because I can be a little crazy, and also could be a little crazy sometime. Well, we went through that whole night, and the whole night, we never, like even when she introduced me to like other people who were not dressed up crazy, we spoke in Southern accents. I gave her a nickname. She was my sugar daisy. I know it's ridiculous, but hers was even better. I was her country stallion. And so we just went back and forth joking, and that was the night that the magic happened. Within a very short period of time, we were official. We were an item. Within a few months of that, I was talking to my parents about, I'm going to buy a ring for this girl, and they're like, I didn't know you were that serious. It happened that fast. Within a few months, and then we got married about a year later. That's how love happens. It's fast, and it can happen for any of you. And if you're here and you've written off the prospects and you said there's no chance and it's not going to happen for me, well, you never know when Cupid's arrow is going to strike. You never know when the magic's going to happen. That's why this song starts off so quickly, because that's the way love is. It's magical. Love is magical. But, and this sets us up for our second point, love is magical, but it is not automatic. It's magical, but not automatic. Before I read into the next passage, the next portion of the scripture, we're going to read verses 4 through 6. Here's why I think we need to make that point, besides the fact that that's how the scripture itself portrays it. But I think it's important for us to understand. I think we have this idea in our culture about, like, God has a soulmate for me up in heaven. Like maybe he has this assembly line of soulmates, and he kind of like dishes them out to people. And then like you're just sitting there, and one day soulmate falls in your lap, and magic happens. Isn't that the way it works? But according to this passage, that's not actually true. Before you can experience the magic of love, there are actually obstacles in your own heart that you will have to overcome. And we're going to see those obstacles come up in the story of this Hebrew Cinderella. We'll also learn why I'm calling her a Hebrew Cinderella. Okay, let's read the second half of verse 4 through verse 6. It says, we will exult and rejoice in you. Okay, so who's talking? This is basically her peers. These are just other people kind of in the city, in Jerusalem. We will exult and rejoice in you. You is Solomon. We will extol your love more than wine. Rightly do they love you. Okay, so the first thing that we learn here is that it is not just Shulamith who's head over heels for this guy Solomon. It's all the single ladies. It's not just Shulamith that is feeling this dopamine rush and wants to be with him. The first obstacle she has to overcome is there's some competition, and they're saying some of the same things about Solomon that she's saying. Now let's keep reading, and in verse 5 we'll see another obstacle. She says, I am very dark, but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Okay, so what's happening here? Now, to understand what's happening, first of all, we're going to have to step out of our sort of 21st century American mind for a moment, where there is so much racial tension in the air that hopefully the Church of Jesus Christ can shine its light through. But when she says that she is dark here, she is referring to her skin color. In that culture, that was a negative thing, but it wasn't a racial thing. It had nothing to do with race. They were all Jewish, okay? So what it did have to do with was that in that culture, to have dark skin, to be a dark-skinned Jewish person, what it meant was you were one of the peasants, the day laborers. You'd been working out in the sun all day. You were definitely not part of the nobility, the royalty, the aristocracy that would have had lighter skin because they would have been spending their time in palaces and places like that. And so when she says, I'm dark, she's making a comment about what she perceives to be a flaw in her beauty. And then when she goes further and she describes herself as being like the tents of Kedar, this would be like basically a nomad's tent. Picture a teepee that's been out in the sun for a long period of time. A modern equivalent metaphor would be like if you were to say, my skin is like a worn-out baseball glove. It's not really what you want. And so she's actually commenting upon a challenge. It's like she's trying to talk herself into, I'm lovely, but this is kind of how it feels. I have this flaw in my beauty. Again, not a racial thing. It was social class in that day. That's obstacle number 2. Let's keep reading. As we get to number 6, or to verse 6, what we're going to see is that not only does she perceive that she has a flaw in her beauty, and not only does she have competition, but what we're going to see is that her competition is cruel. That just like the sun glared down upon her skin, she feels the glares, the sneers of her competition. That's how it's going to read in verse 6. So she says to her competition, do not gaze at me because I am dark, because the sun has looked upon me. And now she feels the need to explain herself. How did I become this way? And she'll explain 2 more obstacles. She says, my mother's sons were angry with me. They made me keep the vineyards, but my own vineyard I have not kept. What she's talking about is she has suffered both loss and injustice. How do we see that? Well, we'll start with loss. When she says that my brothers were taking care of me, again, in that culture, what that meant is that for some reason, her father was out of the picture. And it could have been because he chose to be out of the picture. It could have been because he died an early death. We don't know. But in that culture, brothers would help raise the sister and oversee her in the event of the loss or the abandonment of a father. And so this woman has grown up without the affirmation of a father. She's grown up perhaps with what we would call daddy wounds. So she's suffered loss, but now injustice too. Because these brothers who were entrusted for caring for little sis, how did they care for her? Did they do a good job? Were they nurturing toward her? No. It says, my mother's sons were angry with me. They made me keeper of their vineyards, but my own vineyard I have not kept. So they turned her into a slave. Now you see why I'm calling her a Hebrew Cinderella. Before there was ever a fatherless Cinderella and evil sisters enslaving her, there was a Hebrew Cinderella who was fatherless, whose brothers enslaved her. And so now you have this woman, Shulamith. She suffered the loss of a father, the injustice of her brothers, an injury to her beauty, and the contempt of her peers. Would you say that's a few obstacles to love? Would you say those would be a breeding ground for the possibility of her becoming jaded toward love, especially toward the love of a king like King Solomon? How's she ever going to have a shot with him? He's going to want one of the royalty, one of the aristocracy. He's going to want somebody else. And I think this begins to explain why our culture is where it's at. How many people have grown up in a broken home and they've projected their past upon their future and said, because I grew up with this broken home, my only possibility for a future is to have a broken home. I'd rather just not have it. You think that's happening a little bit today? We get jaded because we project our past upon our future. Or else we look at a flaw or a perceived flaw in our beauty, which is magnified by social media, which is magnified by the Photoshop pictures by J-Lo dancing at age 50 and doing her thing, okay? We have all these pictures of what beauty is supposed to look like, and we say, well, I have this defect, and I don't weigh the perfect amount, and I don't look perfectly, and I have this and I have that, and we start talking ourselves out of love. Do you hear what I'm saying? And so we become jaded over the course of time. We've suffered losses. We've suffered injustices. And I told you my story. I told you about the magic of Alicia and I falling in love. Well, there's a reason that it didn't happen right away in Scotland. And the reason was that I had some obstacles to overcome in my heart. I'd been in a long-term relationship for a couple of years just prior to that with a girl that I thought I was going to marry. Sounds weird to say now, but with a girl I was very serious with. And we broke up, and it took a while for me to get over that, but I finally got to the point where I was like, I'm over it. I'm ready to move on. I'm good to go. And then right before I hopped on an airplane to Scotland, I got the news that this girl was now transferring. She hadn't been at the University of Texas. She was now transferring to the University of Texas. She was going to be in my school now. Wasn't going to be this long-distance relationship like I have. So now I'm like flooded with all these new thoughts and emotions and like, what do I do with this? So by the time I got to Scotland, Alicia just registered, this guy isn't interested at all. And so that's why the magic didn't happen right away. There were obstacles. And so all of you, everybody has that kind of thing. Before we ever face obstacles in a romantic relationship, we have obstacles in our own heart to deal with. And honestly, this is part of God's way of preparing us for a future long-term relationship, because if we don't deal with the obstacles in our heart and we just jump into a relationship, we bring our baggage with us. So love is magical, but it's not automatic. There's some obstacles for us to overcome. You say, how do I overcome them then? I'm going to give you 3 ways. 3 ways to overcome them and to not be jaded and to continue to hold on to God's view of love as magical. Number 1, talk yourself into love, not out of it. Talk yourself into love, not out of it. And I kind of alluded to this earlier, but that's what Shulamith, the woman, the Hebrew Cinderella, is doing. When she says, I'm dark but lovely, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. It's like she's feeling the criticisms of this, the burning criticisms of her competition, and she's saying, no, but I'm really lovely, and I really got something desirable here to offer. And so she's trying to talk herself into it. And so what I would say to you is, if you're single and you're looking for a relationship, what I would say is, Taylor Swift, shake them haters off, right? Don't listen to the haters, don't listen to the doubters, nor listen to that inner critic. Give God the louder voice in your life. The only people who fall in love are those who don't talk themselves out of it. They talk themselves into it. You're worthy of love. Number 2, this is going to sound funny. I feel like I'm probably the only preacher in America saying this, like in a sermon on a Sunday morning, but it's in the Bible, and I'm going to say it. Put yourself out there. Put yourself out there. We're going to continue into verse 7. So what she's done is she's sort of talked herself up, like, I can do this, I can do this. And then we get to verse 7. And it says, tell me, you whom my soul loves, where you pasture your flock, where you make it lie down at noon. For why should I be like one who veils herself beside the flock of your companions? Okay, so what's happening here? So she's talking to Solomon as though he is a shepherd. Now, Solomon was not a literal shepherd. He was a king. So this is not meant to be taken literally. It's meant to be taken figuratively. And so what she's doing is she's approaching Solomon and she's saying, listen, Solomon, I don't want to know you as the royal celebrity, the famous guy that all the girls want to be with because you're rich and famous. I want to know you as the ordinary guy. I want to know you as the real Solomon. This is actually a request for an intimate friendship. How's that for putting yourself out there? The Hebrew Cinderella says, I want to be friends with you. Let's get to know each other. Later in the verse, when she says, I don't want to be like a veiled woman amongst your companions, I'm ready to put this competition behind me, but also veiled woman, in that culture, that was how a prostitute covered herself. And so what she's saying is, I don't just want to know you in some sort of sexual fling rendezvous. Solomon had a little bit of a history there. More on that next week. She's saying, I don't want to be just another one of your, sexual flings. That's not what I'm looking for. I want to be unique amongst all the other women, and I want to really get to know you as a friend. A couple of notes on putting yourself out there. One is, and by the way, this applies to singles and marrieds. I want to show you. But throughout the Song of Songs, one thing that you notice is that it is not just the male who's always doing the pursuing, always doing the initiating. Whether it's romantic or sexual, throughout the Song of Songs, I would say, I haven't counted them, but it's either 50-50 or the woman's actually doing it more. But the point is that they're both involved in this. And so to address like the singles perspective first, okay, ladies, it's okay to put yourself out there. When I fell in love with Alicia, she actually invited me on that first date, okay? So I'd love to say I was the knight in shining armor who rode in and swept her off her feet and took her from the castle where she was a damsel in distress and, and all of that, but she asked me on the first date, okay? So, ladies, it's actually okay. Now, I'm not saying, go around, just asking guys on date. Don't be desperate about it, but what I am saying is, it's okay to make it known that you're available. Another thing Alicia did was she invited me over for a meal. She won my heart through my belly. Okay, so it's okay to just do that, and that's not just for ladies. That's for guys. In fact, just as much for guys, because a lot of the young guys, we're just waiting around for some girl to swipe right and I like him. It's like, hey, just go out there and get the girl, man. So part of it is for putting yourself out there on the dating side of things. But part of it is also on the marriage side of things. Because here's what happens in marriage. What happens in marriage is one partner puts themselves out there, and romantically or sexually, and the other does not reciprocate, and then this one shuts down because this one feels rejection. And that's how the magic of love starts to feel jaded in a marriage. It's not just the responsibility of one party to do all the initiating romantically or sexually. There really should be a balance in a healthy marriage where both partners, romantically and sexually, are putting themselves out there, are initiating in that regard. Okay? So that's the first thing. Actually, I'm going to say one more thing on this note, is putting yourself out there, since you guys are being really quiet right now. I'm just going to say this, and this is for the singles, okay? Online dating. No problem with that, okay? There is no stigma with online dating. Did you know that 40% of couples today meet online? It is the 21st century. The reason I say that is that as a pastor, every time I ask somebody how they meet, if they met online, they mumble that part. They're like, hey, we met online. I don't know why that should be embarrassing to us. It really shouldn't. Because, in the old days, they had like a town square. Like, everybody go to the town square. Oh, I met Susie at the town square. Okay? And then after a while, it was like in the Saved by the Bell days, they went to the Max. You remember that? There is no town square. There is no Max. People don't meet anywhere except online, it seems. Okay? And so you really shouldn't feel a stigma. As your pastor, I'm eliminating the stigma. Okay? There is no stigma with that. Anybody meet online in here? Yeah, give them a hand. Woo! There are actually 50 more of you, but I just was not able to sufficiently remove what you feel to be a stigma. So now we're going to continue through to the last point. The last point is consistently praise your partner. Consistently praise your partner. And so what happens next is in verse 8, Solomon speaks for the first time in the song. He compliments her, and then they enter into this sort of dance of praise, is what I call it. They go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, all the way, and we'll just pick it up in chapter 2, verse 1, and we'll read through verse 3 in this dance of praise. She's the one speaking in verse 1. It says, I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. He says, as a lily among the brambles, my sugar daisy. Just kidding. Sorry. This is God's holy word. I shouldn't make jokes. As a lily among brambles, so is my love among the young women. Verse 3, she speaks, as an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men. With great delight I sat in his shadow, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. Okay, what I want to point out is that one of the greatest themes, another one of the greatest themes of the Song of Songs, is this dance of praise. It is all over the place. I mean, they are constantly praising each other. You're amazing. You're the best. You're number one. You're beautiful. You're smart and lovely. I mean they're just going on. And what's fascinating and beautiful about it is it's not just in the dating phase, right? Like when it's all dopamine, like it's not hard to praise your partner. Like you don't even see the flaws in your partner. You're my perfect dove. You know, like you can't even see any flaws. You're just so flooded with dopamine, just the praises are flowing out. But what happens after 10 years of marriage? After a while, and you don't have the dopamine flow, and the truth is nobody could live with that. Like that's not reality. You can't live with that forever. But after a while, compliments turn to criticisms. Why? Because instead of being in love with your actual spouse, you're in love with the ideal version of your spouse. And you see yourself as God's appointed change agent to help your spouse become the person that you can love. Now, who's the real problem in that scenario? Is it your spouse who needs to change? Or is it you who needs to love your spouse just as he or she is? That's what love is. Love is not contingent upon a spouse changing. Love loves flaws and all. Just like this woman, she's saying, I have flaws in my skin. I'm not attractive. And he says, oh no, you're a lily among the thorns. In fact, to come back to this, I want to show you the way praise transforms their relationship and brings it to a place of more profound magic, if you will, that goes beyond the puppy love and intoxication of that one glass of wine, of that dopamine rush. I want to show you that here as it plays out in the passage. Whenever she says, I'm a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. Now, it's like she's trying to talk herself into this, like, who am I to be in a relationship with a king? I'm beautiful. I belong here. But this is a little bit like, whenever you try to convince yourself that you have worth because Jesus died for you, and you're like, yeah, but he died for everybody, so I'm not apparently that worthy, just like everybody else. I'm just an everybody, which makes me a nobody. It's like we talk ourselves out of it. And so she's not really pointing out how unique she is. She's like, well, I'm beautiful like one of the lilies in the valley, but there's lots of lilies. And Solomon's like, no. We ain't going to have none of that. He says, as a lily among the brambles, girl, you make that competition you were so worried about, you make them look like thorn bush in comparison. And so what does it do to her? Verse 3, she says, as an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men. And so an apple tree was a place where you could find shade, the trees of the forest. So notice first he's talked about the competition. There is no competition, honey. And then she says you're like an apple tree in the forest. The forest speaks of danger. She's had bad experiences with men. Her husband or her brothers mistreated her. Her father, whether he died or whether he abandoned, we don't know. But at the end of the day, she didn't have a lot of positive experiences with men. And now here she has Solomon. And what does she find there under that apple tree? She says, a shadow. She says, I find shade here. This is a reference to what happened earlier. Do you remember the burning sun of other people's criticisms? Do you remember the burning anger of her brothers against her? And so what she's saying is all the anger, all the injustice, all the loss, all the suffering that I experienced before has been replaced by the mutual love that we find in one another. And so what she's essentially saying is I've gone from, this is Michael's language, but I've gone from dopamine rush in the beginning to secure love, which is more deeply satisfying. I can just reach up and grab an apple. And so she speaks of a deeper satisfaction of love. that comes through praise. So I want to show you guys something. Now, you've already been let in on the fact that my wife and I can be cheesy sometimes. This is our Journal O Love. And its first entry was, on this one, is August 22nd, 2003. And I gave this to her, and it was my first, kind of like my first love, I think it was my very first love letter. And I wrote this to her, and I said, this journal is for you to respond, and then I'll respond, and then you respond, and I'll respond, and it just will be a back and forth over the course of our relationship, which we kept doing, and we kept doing. You can see these pages are filled, and I will not let you read it, and actually continued into marriage as well. I share that with you because I want to make a challenge. I want to make a challenge to anyone who is in a romantic relationship, okay? My challenge is I want you to buy a journal today, okay? Today. And I want you to buy this journal today and begin that conversation. I want you to write your first letter. And just, guys, I'm going to say, you do it, okay? Guys, I'm going to challenge you to go do it. I don't have time, whatever, lose 20 minutes of sleep. Go to Tum Thum or Walmart and buy a journal and write it, okay? And write that first one. And so it's a challenge throughout this series. I'd like for each of you to write a letter to each other, one a week throughout this series, praising and encouraging and loving on your lover. Do you think you could do that? Raise your hand if you're in. Can you do that? Okay. All right. Good. One last thing, and we're finished. One last thing. I want to show you guys a picture. Can we put that picture up on the screen? Isn't that cute? That is a picture of D.W. Williams, 103 years old, and his 100-year-old smoking hot wife, Willie. In this picture, they have just celebrated their 82nd year of marriage. They've made it through the Great Depression, World War II, Jim Crow, Civil Rights Movement, Vietnam War, 9/11, Great Recession, all up through today. And they tell you today, they say, we're still best friends. When you see that picture, doesn't it warm your heart? Now let me ask you a question. What's more magical? What's more beautiful? The world's vision of love, where every 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years you hop from one lover's home to another lover's home to another lover's home to another lover's home? Or D.W. and Willie, 82 years, 8 decades, still continuing to be each other's only lover and best friend? I think the answer is obvious to anyone with eyes. That is beautiful. And the reason it's beautiful is that, like every true love story, it points to the love story behind them all, a love story that goes like this. The Son of God, Jesus Christ, looked down from heaven, and when he saw you and me and all of our defects, with all of our baggage, with all of our flaws, he didn't love us after we changed. He loved us just like we were, so much that he left heaven and came to earth. He left his heavenly home to be united to his bride. And how did he do it? He died on a cross. He sealed his covenant with us in his blood so that we could rest in the shade of the tree that he died on. And 3 days later, he rose again so we could live forever with him, happily ever after. That's the greatest love story. Let's pray.